three passages that we're looking at this morning that delineate that. And they're this: a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Jesus, needs to be forgiving, radically forgiving. They need to be faith-filled, and they need to be faithful. Right? If you call yourself a follower of Jesus this morning, if you would call yourself a Christian, then what Jesus requires of you is that you be forgiving, faith-filled, and faithful. Well, let's turn to look at that first element here. We must be forgiving, verses 1 to 4. Because Jesus begins here by saying that temptations to sin are sure to come. Right? In this broken and in this fallen world, temptations to sin are absolutely inevitable. And we need to understand that. We need to embrace that if we're going to live with wisdom in this world. But what's interesting is the word that lies behind that English phrase, temptations to sin, is actually a single word in Greek. And that single word literally means scandals. Right? Jesus is saying scandals are sure to come. Other Bibles translate it as stumbling blocks, right? Things to trip you up, things to trip over, things that want to send you on your face are absolutely inevitable. Things will try and come and cause you to sin. And often, Jesus is saying, and predominantly, those things will come through people. Temptations to sin are sure to come, but woe to the one through whom those temptations come. See, just because something is inevitable, Jesus is saying, doesn't mean that the perpetrator is blameless. And actually, it's quite sobering what Jesus says about that person through whom those temptations come, isn't it? Just look at it. He said it would be better off for that person if a millstone were hung around their neck and they were drowned in the sea. Happy New Year. Right? A millstone was this large stone that was used to grind grains to turn it into flour. And it was an incredibly heavy thing. Jesus is saying it's better for you to have concrete boots and be thrown in the Tay than for you to tempt someone to sin. You know, if that seems kind of harsh to you, if that seems ridiculous to you, then you may not be taking sin as seriously as Jesus does. Sin is the one thing that can truly destroy you. It's the one thing that can truly threaten you and everyone else around you. It is the greatest threat to your life out there. It's the reason the world is the way that it is. Christians are to take sin seriously. And here's how these verses tell us to do it. Here's how we're told to take this kind of sin and the temptations to sin seriously. We are neither to give offense or to take offense. Right? As Christians, we're neither to give offense or take offense. We're not to cause anyone to stumble by either of those two things. Okay, so how do Christians cause others to sin? How do they tempt others to stumble? Well, the first thing is by giving unnecessary offense. By giving unnecessary offense, right? So there are ways that Christians give offense just by being who we are. There's a kind of necessary offense that believing the gospel brings in a world like ours. In fact, actually, Christians are taught by Jesus and by his followers to expect to be hated for following him, to expect to cause scandal by our very presence in our communities. And speaking to early Christians in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23, Paul says this: "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block," actually that's literally the word scandal again, "to Jews, and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God." The very fact that you're a Christian is going to cause people to stumble. The very fact that you believe that Jesus is the only way to know God and to be saved is going to cause people to stumble. That's a necessary offense of the gospel. And far be it from us to remove that stumbling block of Jesus before people. And this isn't just Christians playing the victim card either, by the way. I was doing a bit of reading this week, and there was a Roman general called Tacitus, and he names Christians enemies of the human race. That was the reputation that Christians had in the Roman Empire. And they were called that because of their stubborn disregard for Roman religion and all of the civic stuff that came along with it. Early Christians were offensive. They were scandalous because they were exclusive with their worship. They believed in only one God and only one Lord, and they refused to worship anyone else. They refused to worship the emperor as God, and that was scandalous. But in a postmodern and pluralistic society like ours, Christians are no less scandalous for claiming exclusively to worship Jesus alone. But now we actually have an added offense. Did you know that? The added offense to us being Christians in the world in which we live is our beliefs about creation. It's what we believe about humanity. It's what we believe about why we're here and our purpose. You know, as Christians, we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. We believe that that's what the Bible teaches, and that is scandalous. We believe that gender is very real, and it's an integral part of God's design for human relationships. At the roots of our very nature, we are male and female. It's how we created, and we don't get to change that. That is scandalous. We believe that men and women are infinitely interchangeable and swappable. We believe that the human body isn't just a blank canvas and a machine to be bent to our will, but that there are God-given and good limitations to our existence, and that is scandalous. Do you see how just by being a Christian, just by believing these things, you can cause a stumbling block and a scandal? That's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about something very different, because given all of that, there is a kind of unnecessary offense we can cause. We can cause others to stumble, not just by what we believe, but just by being jerks. You know, it's easy to lead others to sin through one thing, and that's our inconsistency. Christians lead people to stumble and sin. We tempt others to sin because of our inconsistency. Right? The truth is, if you're a Christian, people are going to be watching. If people know you're a Christian, you've lost the right to privacy in one sense. They will be looking. They'll be listening. They'll be seeing whether what you do matches up with what you say and what you believe. They will know, even if they've never read the Bible in their life, that there is a certain standard that is required of us as disciples of Jesus, as people who claim to follow him. Right? If you're harsh and if you're judgmental, or if you're unkind, or if you make promises that you don't keep, things like that, people will stumble over you. You will tempt them to sin. And Jesus says, woe to you if that happens. Woe to you if you cause someone to sin. You know, as a Christian, we don't have the right anymore to say, well, if they're offended, that's their problem. Jesus is saying, no, that's your problem. If someone stumbles over your inconsistencies, that is your problem. Jesus is saying that the gospel is offensive enough. Don't put any extra barriers or stumbling blocks in people's way that might lead them to disbelieve in Jesus. Don't cause unnecessary offense. But another way we can cause people to stumble is not just by giving unnecessary offense, but it's by taking unnecessary offense, by taking things too personally. Now, I'll be brief here. But in verses 3 and 4, Jesus commands us to do something that is really difficult. He commands us to forgive radically. He commands us to forgive perfectly. He commands us to forgive completely. He says that if someone sins against you 7 times in a day, then you must forgive them. This is not a suggestion. This is a command. You must forgive them. Now, that is not saying that on time number 8, you get to crush them. At time number 8, you don't have to forgive. You've got to count. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now I'm going to get you. No, see, the number 7 in the Bible is a symbolic number. It is a number of perfection. It is a number of completeness. What Jesus is saying is that you have to forgive in an unlimited fashion. No matter how often a person asks you for forgiveness, you have to forgive them. No payback, no bitterness, no taking offense, no anger whatsoever. That's the standard here. And notice that Jesus doesn't just say, sweep it under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen. Look at verse 3. Right? No, if someone sins against you, what does he say? Rebuke them. It's not loving to let someone go on sinning. It's not loving to hide that from anyone. You have to actually be willing to confront people. You actually have to be willing to call sin out where it is, but you have to forgive as well. That's a high standard, is it not? Unforgiveness and bitterness is not an option. But neither is kind of sweeping it under the rug and pretending like it didn't happen. Listen, there's a lot more I could say about this, and we have limited time here this morning, but come and talk to me after the service this morning if you have questions about forgiveness. You know, like, should I forgive someone who hasn't actually asked for forgiveness? What about that? There are so many other issues surrounding this. I also want to point you to a great book that I've read recently about this. It's by Tim Keller. It was the last book that he wrote before he died, and it's called Forgive. It's one of his best books. It's only a very, very short one. But can I recommend that you go away and get that book and read it? It's immensely practical, and it covers a lot of the things that we've been talking about here this morning. But the first thing that a disciple of Jesus is supposed to be is radically forgiving. Neither causing anyone to stumble unnecessarily, nor taking unnecessary offense from people. It's a high standard, isn't it? Because we're told actually in the next verses, in verses 5 and 6, that we're supposed to be faith-filled, because these verses are all chained together. They actually all fit together like pieces of a puzzle, because the understandable response to what Jesus says about forgiveness that we've just been talking about is, I don't have the faith to do that. I don't have the resources to forgive like that. You're telling me that I've got to forgive people so consistently that I never fail in it. That's really difficult. And look at what his disciples say. Lord, increase our faith. It's kind of a bit of buck passing there, isn't there? Listen, Jesus, I'd like to forgive like that, and that's a really nice kind of aspiration. Maybe that's a New Year's resolution for next year, but we don't really have the faith for that right now. So could you just please zap us with the faith that we need? And as always, Jesus' response to them completely trips them up. It's wonderful. See, the disciples are assuming that the bar that Jesus has set is so high that only a special kind of Christian can clear it. Only the kind of spiritual elite can meet that standard of forgiveness, that you need to be some kind of super Christian to forgive like this and to avoid causing or taking unnecessary offense. But Jesus actually shows them that this is not something that is inaccessible to them. It's actually something that is for every Christian. It's not just for pastors and missionaries and monks. Every single Christian is held to this standard. See, he says in verse 6 that faith as small as a mustard seed is enough. Faith as small as a mustard seed is all you need. Right? Many of you will have seen mustard seeds before, right? They're great in curries. I use them all the time, but they're absolutely tiny. So what does that mean then? Here's what it means. It means that for the Christian, it is not the strength of their faith that matters. It is the object of their faith that matters. It is not the quantity of their faith, but it's the quality of their faith. See, the reality is that as a Christian, you already have the faith required to live like Jesus lays out in verses 1 and 4. You have it already. You just have to take it out and exercise it. Right, I want you to imagine a scenario. I want you to imagine that you're going for a walk high up on the cliffs near Arbroath. You've seen those cliffs before? They're beautiful, but they're really, really high up. You don't want to go near the edge. But unfortunately, you do. You go to the edge, you trip over a root, and you stumble, and you pitch straight over into the air. And as you fall, you see that there is a branch, a tiny little branch, sticking out of the side of the cliff as you descend down. Now, that branch is your only hope. And unbeknownst to you, that tiny branch is more than strong enough to hold your weight. Listen, if your mind is filled with certainty that that branch can hold you, and yet you don't reach out to grab it, you're lost. It's over. You're gonna hit the water like concrete, and it's curtains for you. But if your mind is full of doubts and fear that the branch can hold you, but you do actually reach out and grab it, you'll be saved. Why is that? It's because weak faith in a strong branch is totally superior to strong faith in a weak branch. Right? It is not the strength of your faith that saves you and sustains you. It is the object of your faith that does that. And what this means is that you don't have to complain like the disciples do here, that you lack the faith to forgive and live like Jesus is calling you to this year. It's not dependent upon your will. It's not dependent upon your resolutions. It's not dependent upon just like screwing up and trying harder and then failing a few months down the line and stopping trying. No, you already have the faith that you need. You don't have to wait to be perfect. You don't have to wait for all of your flaws and doubts to go away. You can embrace Jesus now. And even as a Christian, you can live like he's calling you to now, right here, right now. Now is the day. Now is the time. Right? If you are a Christian here this morning, let me put it this way. When you became a Christian, did you understand the whole gospel and the whole Bible in one go? Did it all suddenly just make sense and click into place and you knew it all back to front? No. You only understood a mustard seed-sized portion of the gospel, but that was enough, wasn't it? That was enough to save you. It was enough to bring you into the kingdom of Jesus. That tiny seed of faith had within it enough power to change the course of your life, to uproot it completely and to change you and enable you to forgive. This kind of faith, this mustard seed faith, by the way, is how you enter the Christian life in the first place. I've lost count of how many people are just sitting around and waiting until they can be absolutely certain to put their trust in Jesus and to become a Christian. But you don't have to do that. Not a single one of us in this room became Christians after we'd figured it all out. Those of us who have been Christians for decades are still figuring it out, just like the disciples here. But a mustard seed of faith was enough. And by God's grace, we grabbed the branch, and it held. And it's still holding. And that's all you need, Jesus is saying. Look, you cannot be a Christian without faith. You cannot even forgive, like Jesus is saying here, without faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. But faith is not an ability. Faith is a gift. Faith is a treasure that is given to you. It's why the disciples actually ask Jesus to increase their faith. They know that it is something that is given, but it's actually something that they already have. So the kind of faith you need is like a tiny seed, not a mighty mountain. The seed, doesn't it, has everything within it that it needs to grow. Has all the pattern, all the DNA, all the blueprint for becoming a mighty tree. Jesus is saying we have the same thing. You think you don't have the resources to forgive? You have everything that you need in the faith that you already have. So let me ask you a question. What are some of the things you've been putting off because they require great trust in God? Maybe there's a person you want to share the gospel with, but you're afraid to do so because you're afraid to take that step of faith. Maybe God is calling you to do something that seems scary. Maybe he's calling you to put some resources of yours on the line that will affect your lifestyle. Maybe he's calling you into a new phase or stage of life this year. I don't know what it is, but what is the thing that God is calling you to that you're afraid to step into because you feel like you don't have the trust in him that you need? Well, let me tell you this morning that you do. You have everything that you need. Faith like a mustard seed is all you need because Jesus is all you need. And Jesus never commands you to do something that he doesn't also equip you to do. Maybe it's just you're hesitating. I had a friend of mine who's a pastor now in the United States, and he said that he wanted to be a missionary, and he actually spent a few years of his life being a missionary in China. It was a really interesting part of his life, but the thing that led him to do that was that he realized that he was reading all of these biographies about Christian heroes and missionaries who took these amazing steps of faith, men like Hudson Taylor and James O. Fraser, who left everything to go and serve God abroad. And he said he realized that his whole life he'd been stepping up to the edge and looking over. The difference between him and those men was not the strength of their faith or the greatness of their faith, it's just that they stepped over. So what step might you need to be taking in faith this year? Can I encourage you to take that step of faith? Because Jesus will hold on to you, and you have the faith that you need. Maybe it's just even faith to forgive someone. You have it. You just need to exercise it. See, because Christians are supposed to be forgiving and faith-filled, but we're also supposed to be faithful. Faithful servants of our master. Now, this is the parable that Jesus teaches in verses 7 to 10, and there's so much in here that we can get into, but we'll be here all day if I'm talking about everything that I've discovered this week. And we have to come to the Lord's table this morning, so I'm going to be selective here in verses 7 to 10. See, he tells a parable, doesn't he? He tells a story about a servant who's working in the field, and he comes back in, and he continues to serve his master. And in telling this parable, Jesus is teaching his followers that they are supposed to see themselves as obedient servants. That actually one of the governing pictures that is supposed to control their view of themselves in his kingdom is as a servant. Now, some of you might have in your Bibles the word servant. Some of you might have the word bond servant. And the original word actually there is the word doulos, which means slave. Jesus is actually talking about slavery here. Now, as always, we have to be really careful because first century slavery, the kind of slavery that Jesus is talking about here, is not the same as New World race-based slavery in the 17th and 18th centuries and onwards. Now, first century slavery was not a good institution by any stretch of the imagination, but it was not the same thing as New World slavery. See, unlike New World slavery, first century slavery wasn't race-based. Education was greatly encouraged, with some slaves being better educated than their masters. Many slaves actually carried out sensitive and highly responsible social functions in their towns and cities. Slaves could actually own property, and their religious and cultural traditions were the same as free people. And actually the majority of urban slaves and domestic slaves could anticipate being freed by the time that they were 30. So slavery was not lifelong. It was temporary. Now listen, I could say more about the topic, but our time is short. I'm just saying this to help us get over what is a stumbling block for us, which is our 21st century blinders about slavery, so we can see the benefit of what Jesus is saying here. Because Jesus is making the point that a slave or servant is somebody whose life is defined by duty. Somebody whose life is defined not by rights, but by responsibility. A slave in that time was somebody who was deeply indebted and whose will was subordinate to the will of their masters. The master's will came first. And Jesus is saying that is what it means to be a Christian. It's going to take faith to do that. It's going to take faith to trust the master to that extent. But his will has to come first. See, many slaves in the ancient world would have been taken as the spoils of war. But many more were actually people who had sold themselves into slavery because they were deep in debt. They were actually debt slaves. It was a kind of indentured servitude. There was someone who was in debt and sold their labor to a master who owned that labor until the debt was paid. But actually, that wasn't the only option that was given to their master. What the master could do was take that debtor and just throw them in debtor's prison and be done with them. But here Jesus is talking about the kind of slave whom the master has embraced and taken into his household and allowed to work off that debt. See, by using this example, Jesus is saying that a Christian is like this bondservant, somebody who realizes that they are indebted, that they have a debt that they cannot pay, and they throw themselves on the mercy of their master. See, a Christian is somebody who realizes that they owe a debt to God. That's what a Christian is. Right? Think about it. What debt do we owe to God? Christians believe that God is the creator of everyone and everything, that he created us, and therefore we owe him literally everything. We believe that God as creator holds all things together, that every atom in the universe is sustained by the word of his power, that every breath that we draw is a gift from him, that even the things that we think are actually ours and belong to us are at their roots and at the beginning gifts of his sheer grace and sheer mercy to us. So we owe him. We're obligated to him. We owe him thankfulness. We owe him making him number one in our lives. But we make all kinds of other things number one, don't we? And we treat God as an irrelevance most of the time. See, we're deeply indebted to him. Okay, let's flip it around. What does God owe us? Nothing. God owes us nothing. He owes us nothing except to throw us into debtor's prison, so to speak. But does he do that? No. No, he doesn't. He sends his son, born of a virgin, born as a human being, born under the law to redeem us and to rescue us. God actually extends forgiveness, the kind of forgiveness that we were looking at in the first point, at great cost. He himself pays our debt. He himself clears our record forever. See, a Christian has to have that mentality about themselves to truly be a disciple. And because of that mercy, because the master has taken on the servicing of their debt, the servant actually places no limits on their obedience. Right? Verses 7 and 8 show us that a servant isn't always thinking about their rights and entitlements. They're actually thinking and focused on their duty. Right? In verse 10, Jesus says, "So you too, when you have done all you have been commanded." Listen, I know Christianity is all about freedom. It's all about grace. It's all about peace. But there are also commands. There are commands that are laid upon us. The command to forgive, the command to follow Jesus, the command to live a life of holiness. That is what we owe Jesus for everything that he has done for us. See, everything that is being said here stresses the total commitment of the servant to their master and the total claim of the master over their servant. There is not 1 inch of your life, there is not 1 atom in your body over which Jesus does not proclaim, "Mine." You belong to him. You were bought with a price. You belong to him. And all of this, by the way, therefore, must mean that the Christian's obedience to Jesus must be as unconditional as his love is for them. Do you realize that? Your obedience to Jesus this year is to be as unconditional and as unlimited as his love is for you. That's the paradigm we're supposed to be working from. If you only obey Jesus when you understand why and how it benefits you, you're not obeying at all. Putting any conditions on your obedience to God and your obedience to Jesus means you are not obeying at all. See, becoming a Christian is like signing the deeds to your house over to him. That's what it's like. But obeying Jesus selectively is like saying, look, Jesus, this is your house. I'm signing the deed over to you, but you can't go into this room. This room is actually going to still stay locked to you. Okay, so is Jesus your master, and are you his servant, or is he just kind of your consultant? Is he just kind of your advisor? Is he coming to do a bit of redecorating, and he's sort of given you some ideas, and maybe you don't like the colors here and there, so you're just going to kind of take it under advisement? See, Jesus, that is not who he is. He is supposed to be your master. See, where are the rooms in your life that are off limit to Jesus? Where are the doors that are still closed to him? Where are the things in your past that you may be hiding from him? Where are the sins that are present in your life, or the unforgiveness that is present in your life that you're refusing to bring to him? Well, you're not obeying unconditionally at that point. Unconditional obedience is basically one of the things that is supposed to fundamentally define us as being a Christian. Because listen, the Bible commands you to do all kinds of things that don't make sense. If you expect that everything you read in the Bible is going to make sense to you as a Christian, you're going to be disappointed. Right? Think about the things we've discussed this morning. We're supposed to forgive relentlessly, regardless of what somebody has done to you. There's no qualifications put on it there. Does that make sense to you? Doesn't always make sense to me. And yet we're supposed to obey it unconditionally. You're supposed to confront sin in the lives of your fellow Christians and risk serious conflict in doing so. There is one thing in the Bible that does not make sense to British people. It's that. It's confronting things in other people. We hate conflict. We want to avoid it. And yet Jesus is saying, I want you to do that, even though it doesn't make sense. Here's another thing we're told to do. We're commanded to do. Die to yourself and your own preferences. Put others first. Count others as more significant than yourselves. Give of your time and money to such an extent that it begins to affect your lifestyle and puts your current lifestyle at risk. Live in total purity, whether in marriage or in single life. Listen, if you waited for things to make sense before obeying, you'd never obey. But the servant obeys the master regardless of whether they understand or not. So a Christian is somebody who is forgiving, somebody who is faith-filled, somebody who sees themselves as a servant, yes, even a slave of Jesus. And that is hard. This is like a shot in the arm for us this year, isn't it? It's like smelling salts. The world tries to drag us into focusing on ourselves and our rights, but Jesus is saying, no, you will only find freedom, paradoxically, in focusing on your responsibilities to me and to the gospel. But you see, this idea of servanthood is not the only thing that is said about Christians in the Bible. Being a Christian is more than being a servant. If you're a Christian, you're a beloved child of God. You're an heir of the kingdom. You're a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. Right? The Bible has a lot more to say about what a Christian is, but a Christian is not less than a servant. And why is that? Well, think about who the master is. But Jesus is the master who became a servant, isn't he? What does he do to his disciples at the Last Supper? You know, it talks about dressing, the servant, the slave coming in and dressing themselves for service. Same word is used of Jesus when he wraps a towel around himself and washes the feet of his disciples. We've been talking about footwise. There's nothing more Christ-like than attending to someone's feet. It's the job of a slave back in the first century. And Jesus, the master, does that. And Jesus says, if I who am your teacher have done this for you, you also ought to, there's the obligation again, do this for one another. Jesus is the master who sets the example of a servant. See, Jesus is the one to whom everything is owed, and yet he takes on the debt of all. Really changes the way you look at your service and obligations in the Christian life, doesn't it? Hear these words from Philippians chapter 2. Have this mind amongst yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though, being in the very form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be held onto or grasped, but he emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Listen, the world is telling us that we need to focus on filling ourselves, filling our bank accounts, filling our lives with things that are going to make us feel good. But actually the Christian life says you need to be emptied. Nothing more empty than a servant, because it's only when you're emptied can you be filled with the love of Jesus. See, Christians are still debtors. We're still in debt, but we're debtors to mercy. We're debtors to mercy alone. See, a Christian is somebody who knows that their true freedom is found in service to Jesus, the master who died the death of a slave to redeem them. The master in whose service is perfect freedom. Look, if what I've said this morning makes it sound like the Christian life is drudgery and duty and dour, then you haven't understood the joy of service to him. You know, one of my favorite poets, the abolitionist William Wilberforce, understood it well, and he wrote these words: "To see the law by Christ fulfilled and hear his pardoning voice changes a slave into a child and duty into choice." Or take the words of his friend John Newton, the former slave ship captain: "Our pleasure and our duty, though opposite before, since we have seen his beauty, are joined to part no more. It is our highest pleasure, no less than duty's call, to love him beyond measure and serve him with our all." Do you know that kind of faith? Do you know that kind of relationship with Jesus as his servant? It is your highest pleasure, no less than duty's call, to love him beyond measure and serve him with our all. See, the dirty secret of Christianity and service in the Christian life is that you realize that your duty becomes your delight because you're serving the one who has served you. And actually, eventually, Jesus says that one day when he comes again and he says, "Welcome home, good and faithful servant," to you, what he is going to do is he's going to invite you to a table, which we're going to celebrate and we're going to foreshadow in a moment. And he's going to dress himself for service. He's going to do the opposite of what the master does in this parable. He's going to say, "Come, sit and eat. Wash, dress, and I will serve you." That's the kind of master that we serve. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for being the kind of master that never calls us to do something that you have not already done infinitely better yourself. Thank you for forgiving us. Thank you for extending radical, perfect, and complete forgiveness to us at great cost to yourself on the cross, taking on our debt and our burdens and carrying them away and paying them in full, and making us instead slaves to Christ, servants to him, and debtors to mercy alone. Lord, if any of us here this morning are carrying debts that we should not need to, help us to lay that down at your cross and pick up the debt and the burden of mercy itself. Lord, help us to follow you. Help us to realize that we have the faith to forgive, that we have the faith to follow you because you have given it to us. Lord, thank you that you are able to do all things, and we praise you in your precious name. Amen.